Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Dave's Faves. And today I want to talk to you about one of my all-time favorite operas and a piece that totally changed how I perceive opera and think about opera and what opera can be. It's Janáček's The Makropulos Case. Wiec Makropulos. Oh my God, what a masterpiece it is. But how strange and wonderful it is. You know, I encountered this. I didn't know what it was, but I remember when it was released. In those days, we couldn't get super fun recordings back in the day. This came out in 1979. And in 1979, I graduated from high school and began college. And there was a wonderful record store in Baltimore called Record Masters, and they had all this stuff. And they had been, I didn't know who Janáček was particularly, or what his operas were. I mean, I knew the Sinfonietta and Taras Bulba, the Kubelik recording on Deutsche Grammophon, and very little else. And I was fascinated by that. So when this came out, I was like, whoa, he wrote operas. Who knew, right? There were a bunch of operas. There was a series of operas that Mackerras was doing with the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, he'd already done Katja Kabanova, which I hadn't heard, and The Cunning Little Vixen and From the House of the Dead and Yennefer were all in the future. And I didn't know who Elizabeth Söderström was particularly. And it was all new. And I dropped the needle on that overture. That overture. And I was just hooked, absolutely hooked. In fact, I'm so fascinated by these operas. I listen to them, without paying any attention to the words whatsoever. I just like to hear them as music. I like the sound of the Czech voice. I like the sing-songy quality he gets. I mean, this is his most austere opera, orchestrally speaking. It's falling out. I mean, it's not like traditionally lyrical, except for the overture, and until you get to that grand scena at the end when Emilia Marti finally dies. And then it's like, absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, it's just so beautiful. But up to that point, it's all just busyness and plot and conversation and it's so gripping. I didn't know what I was hearing. It's amazing. And it's short. Janáček operas are short. They're not much longer than like Mahler's Third Symphony. We're talking about 90 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that. How long is this one? 117 minutes. Well, that's because you also get the Lachian dances as a coupling with Francois Huybrechts, whatever his name is, Huybrechts. And so, but the actual opera is half an hour shorter than that. So it's just amazing how quickly it goes. But more than that, because his orchestral style is based on speech rhythms, the rhythms of Czech speech, as well as little melodic fragments that go before the orchestra, the whole thing just sort of pulsates with life. It has a vitality and a vibrancy, even when the music's very slow, that's like no other composer at all. I mean, if you were to set life to music, it would sound like Janáček. I mean, that's how I feel about this stuff. It's almost inevitable in the way that the music and the words seem to go together. And the result is not only fascinating if you pay attention to the words, but it's marvelous if you just put it on and listen to it. I can't explain it any other way. The story, though, I do have to tell you because the story is just insane. The libretto is by Karl Čapek, who wrote R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots. He invented the word robot for the purposes of his story. Robot means worker. Robotnik actually means worker in Russian and Slavic languages. So he invented the term robot, and he used to write stories of a science fiction-y nature. And in this particular story, Emilia Marti, the head soprano, walks into a lawsuit between descendants of a couple of people. Without getting into the complicated background, they are all her ex-lovers or people she knew because, and she's the reason this whole lawsuit happened, because her father was an alchemist to Emperor Rudolph of Bohemia. and in the 1600s or 1500s, and he was an alchemist, and the emperor said, make me a potion that would give me eternal life, and he did. And the emperor, being distrustful, said, try it on your daughter first. So he did. And she got very sick and passed out, and they thought she was near death. And so the emperor locked up his alchemist, who thought he was trying to poison him, but the stuff worked. And when she recovered, her real name was Elena Makropulos. Hieronymus Makropulos was her father, the alchemist, and she becomes an opera singer, and she lives forever, and she has endless time to perfect her technique, and she changes her name throughout the generations, but not her initials. So she is, at this point, Emilia Marti. But at one point she was Eugenia Montez, whatever, as long as it was E.M. But in the meantime, the question, the philosophical question is, what happens to somebody who has eternal life, or very long life, and she's completely dried up emotionally. She cares about nothing. She's as cold as ice, even though she's a fabulous singer technically. And that's the story. And so she walks into this lawsuit because she wants the formula, because she feels it's wearing off. She's feeling tired and aged. And so she wants to take it again, so she has a longer life. And at the end of the whole thing, she tells everybody what happened with the will and her lover 300 years ago or 200 years ago, and the whole thing gets resolved. They find out who she really is. And she realizes that it's not worth it. It's not worth living again, because the only thing that makes life valuable, the only reason things matter, is because they're ephemeral, because we only have them for a short period of time. But when you never have to worry about that anymore, nothing matters at all. And it's just, it's such a great story. And the music is so intense and so moving. And it's all over so quickly. God, what's not to love? Really, what's not to love? And the overture is just one of the great overtures in the history of mankind. It's phenomenal. So you've got Elizabeth Söderström in one of her great, great, great roles, and Peter Dvorsky as Albert Gregor, and Vladimir Krejcik as Vitek, and Anna Tsakova as Krista, who is the young budding opera singer who admires Emilia. And, the rest of the cast they don't matter. You've got the Vienna Philharmonic, you've got Charles Mackerras, you've got an unbelievably cool story. And if you think opera is difficult, or, opera in Czech you'd think would be particularly difficult because of the language, it's not. It's not. And I just want to say one other thing. There is an earlier recording, there was at the time an earlier recording on Superphone conducted by Bohumil Gregor that featured, famous Czech opera singers. It was quite good of its type, but it was very indifferently recorded. It was an old recording, and the orchestral playing was very soggy and rather uninteresting. Gregor was not a very charismatic conductor, and this one just blows it away. I've heard people who are very faithful to that recording saying, no, it's got to be that one. It's the old classic super. Nonsense. This is the one, and it is amazing. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.